Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be looking at one of the biggest initiatives in the Egyptian modern history, the Decent Life Initiative, an initiative that actually touches upon all different sectors, be it the health sector, educational, real estate, the infrastructure, the energy. All of these sectors are touched upon by the Decent Life Initiative. We're going to be looking at this initiative and focusing on it tonight in light of being behind helping the villages that have been flooded in Upper Egypt. But before we start doing that, let's check out some of the stories making the news today. And we'll start off with the Egypt Defense Expo, EDEX 2021, that continued today, the second day of the event, which ends on December 2nd. On the sidelines of the exhibition, Minister of Defense General Mohammed Zaki received the United Arab Emirates Minister of Defense Mohammed Ahmed al-Bawardi. The meeting discussed developments on the regional and international arenas, as well as means of boosting bilateral military ties between the two sides. And Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli underscored the importance of upgrading the electricity system as an integral component of the government's endeavors to develop standards of living in rural areas across Egypt. This came during a meeting with Minister of Electricity and Renewable Energy, Mohammed Shakir, as part of following up on the works of the presidential initiative, Haya Karima, or A Decent Life. Later, at a cabinet meeting, Madbouli indicated the need to speed up the inclusion of Aswan's villages, which were harmed by the recent rainfall and flash floods in the initiative. This comes in implementation of directives by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during his visit to Aswan last week. These were a couple of the stories making the news today, but now let's check out this report regarding President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi inspecting the flood-hit areas and villages in Aswan Governorate during his visit last week. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
As heavy rains and floods hit the upper governorate of Aswan recently, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi paid a visit to a number of villages there which were affected by the flooding, to follow up on the services provided to residents of this area by medical convoys and units within the framework of the Decent Life Initiative. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was briefed on the urgent relief carried out by the Foundation of Decent Life Initiative to deal with the crisis that hit the affected villages in Aswan, in cooperation with the state's agencies and NGOs. The President directed the involvement of all villages in Aswan and Upper Egypt in the presidential initiative Decent Life. He also visited a number of homes of citizens in the villages damaged by the floods. He assured the affected citizens the state would extend all the possible help for them. The head of state listened to the residents' requests, and during his tour he also met with locals and the medical convoy which was launched by the initiative. President al-Sisi visited Shahama village enrolled in the Decent Life Initiative, a renovated school, and a medical unit in the village. As per presidential directives, the Decent Life Foundation sent food and medical convoys to those who were affected by the heavy rains to help restore some damaged homes. A total of 500 houses were fully prepared to receive the affected villagers. The relief efforts also included medical aid and food aid. Last week, the rains and strong winds hit several cities in Upper Egypt, with an estimated 2,000 families affected in Aswan. 2 weeks ago, the rain, thunder and dust storms, as well as the low temperatures, caused the collapse of tens of homes. The Decent Life Initiative, or Haya Karima, comprises a series of countryside-focused national infrastructural projects. It was first initiated by the President in 2019, who tasked the Ministry of Social Solidarity with developing Egypt's poorest 1,000 villages. In December of 2020, President Sisi expanded the initiative to include 4,500 villages within the framework of Sustainable Development Strategy for Egypt's Vision 2030. The entire national project's budget has been increased to around 600 billion Egyptian pounds.
والله كله
حاجه غير خطوبك
البيت
انت.
كله وجع مننا.
واحنا جايين عشان نعمل كل حاجه.
الله يخليك، ده انت وشك خير علينا والله. والله يوم المطر قلنا في خير جاي.
في خير.
انا الخير وصل النهارده والله.
مش هقول لي انتوا عايزين حاجه.
ايوه
طب الناس اللي هنا
والله
انا جاي عشان
والله
كده.
انا والله بيتي انهار يوم الجمعه اللي قبل بقى 20 يوم. المطر نزل ودمر البيت وقعه. وثاني يوم ساعه المحافظ جه قال لي، انا كنت كلمته قلت له بيتي النهار قاعد بره. قال لي لو عملت لكش بيتك يبقى تحاسبني. بعد اسبوعين فوجئت فخامه الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي وصل عندي في البيت واستقبلته في البيت. قال لي السلام عليكم. قلت له السلام ورحمه الله وبركاته. قال لي اخبارك ايه؟ انت جاي اطمن عليك عشان بيتك اتنهار مع السيول. قلت له كويس الحمد لله تمام. قال لي تمام عايز تمام؟ قلت له الحمد لله. وقلت له طيب لو سمحت يعني البيت اتهار وعايز ابني بيتي. قال لا انا بيتك ده هعمل لك من اول وجديد. وقال لي بس اقول لك حاجه، انا عندي 500 شقه جاهزين، لو عايز تيجي بشنطتك دلوقتي وهدومك تمشي، لو مش عايز اجيب لك الهدوم كمان من عندي. قلت له شكرا يا سياده الرئيس. ودخل فقع البيت وشاف البيت. اول مره كان يوم عيد عندي هنا، يوم جت سياده الرئيس هنا، ويعني من الفرحه يعني والله كان عندي عيد صح. ساعة بيقول في مثل بيقول لك ايه، المطر بيجي بعد منه خير. التاريخ خير وصل سياده الرئيس في المنزل. الجمعه كان راحه. فوجئت العمال جايين في ايه؟ قال لي جايين الشغل. والله ما صدقت، افتكرت نفسي في حلم وقلت البيت ده يعني هيرجع تاني من اول وجديد. المهندس قال لي جاب العمال وشغال والحمد لله. وصح كلام الرئيس، يعني الحمد لله الرئيس انا الواحد بيحترمه، اب الكبير وقائد الكبير، وفوا بوعده والحمد لله. الحمد لله بعد ما الرئيس جاء امر وشاف على الطبيعه وامر حياه كريمه يشتغلوا على طول، وشايفهم شغالين على طول حياه كريمه، ونشكر حياه كريمه شغالين على الطبيعه على طول. بعد ما الرئيس بيجي فوجئنا بيهم جايين شغالين عندنا اهو في المنزل. والله بنشكر سياده الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي قائدنا. فوجئت انا يعني ده كان يوم عيد، يوم شفت الرئيس هنا. والله الحمد لله.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and joining us here tonight in the studio, we're joined by Dr. Tamer Rady, head of the economics department, the Faculty of Business at Ain Shams University. Dr. Rady, always a pleasure having you with us.
Happy to be here.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, now in the recent developments taking place in Aswan, Dr. Rady, you saw how the rainfalls and the flash floods really devastated many villages in Aswan Governorate, and we've seen the president during his visit last week to these villages really taking notice of the suffering of the people, and the Decent Life Initiative sent a big convoy of humanitarian aid, food products, school stationery, uniforms, bags, books, healthcare units, all of these things. And it was something that maybe many years ago would have taken ages to take place, but this has been a prompt response by the government and the Decent Life Initiative. So it begs us to really focus on the efficiency of such an initiative and the magnitude of it. First off, how would you rate the response and the help that the Decent Life initiative has provided for the villagers that were hard hit in Aswan?
Over all standards, it has been really excellent. It was prompt, fast, and it had an incredible amount of coordination between different ministries, and not just ministries, members of the civil society. A whole lot of NGOs are already members of the initiative itself. So it made the coordination very easy, very fast, and the reaction came right on time.
Well, if we want to take a look at the Decent Life initiative, you've been telling me that this is not an initiative or a thought that was only there a few years ago, but it actually dates maybe really a long time ago.
Yes,
that the actual idea came up. So can you please, before we start focusing on the current initiative, give us a background story or a background history of such an initiative?
When you look at the idea of economic development itself, you want to develop people in a nation, any nation. Who are the people that are usually alienated? Those are the people living in rural areas. So it has been always recognized that any government, any central government, wants to extend some aid, some type of help, some type of reform to those living in rural areas. I would say that one of the persons that really started doing that was the great Muhammad Ali, who was ruler of Egypt, 1800s. And he started doing that by focusing only on the agricultural part of it. That did not extend to any other economic sector. And then came President Abdel Nasser. He started focusing or trying to focus on rural areas, especially in the deep south of Egypt. But then a whole lot of wars took place and the economy was crippled. It was always war-oriented. So that initiative lost focus. Later on, around 2005, we tried again. But the whole initiative lacked the coordination that we can see today. So from a proper economic point of view, if you want to conquer poverty, you want to go where it is concentrated the most. In Egypt, that is concentrated in rural areas, and most of those rural areas are in the south of Egypt, or Upper Egypt, as we call it.
Yes. Well, it is a huge initiative that really touches upon, the ethos of it is raising the standard of living for the Egyptian citizen, which is a very simple line, but it really implies a lot of work, a lot of development in different sectors, be it education or health or energy or infrastructure or sanitation or all of these things. And this initiative has been going on for a few years now, and definitely it goes through many different stages, and it doesn't just focus, it starts off focusing on the villages and the rural areas, but it really affects the over 100 million Egyptian citizens.
At the end of it will.
Exactly. So how would you rate the phases that we're going through right now? What would you say have been the biggest achievements of the Decent Life initiative up until now?
Well, the very first achievement is the initiative itself. All right? Because what the initiative does is, for any economist, it made us all happy. We're looking at an initiative that basically targets increasing the Human Development Index, starting from those who are really, really in need for it. Remember, we have had a whole lot of economic reforms within the last few years. Any economic reforms comes at a price. And the hardest hit out of those reforms are usually the poorest and the most alienated. And that's what the initiative targets. So you're targeting something that we have inherited from a whole lot of years, and you're targeting people in which they are the ones that are going to suffer the most or pay the highest price from economic reforms that have been going on.
Yes.
Going with the economic reforms, there is always an aspect or a pillar that makes economic reforms successful. You reach your hands and help those who are in dire need. That's a social aspect of it. And that's what this initiative takes care of. So on top of solving an old Egyptian problem, it's also managing to solve completely new one, that would have been aggravated by economic reforms itself. So here the government came and said, well, let's do it, but in a very holistic way. Let's put some criteria now. Who are the people that are suffering the most? So the people that are suffering the most, by one standard, is those under or are in severe poverty, and those in which they are living in areas in which poverty constitutes, around 70% or more of the population. And that's what the initiative did. Started by really gathering some really good statistics and targeting several villages in which people are poor, above 70% of the population. But this poverty is also not just in income. It's also in education. It's in infrastructure. It's in health. They are in poor health condition. They are in need of sanitation, running water, electricity, natural gas, health care, schools. One aspect of it is to improve the lives of people living in there. But it's more like, I'm not just coming to make you feel better by providing running water. I'm also going to focus on an economic aspect. In development, you're trying to increase the capabilities of people living there. The right to decide their path during their lives, the right to find a proper job and work. So the initiative is also focusing on training, small and micro and mini and medium industries, agricultural reforms in certain areas. You are not trying to give them a fish, you're trying to teach them how to fish and giving them the fishing rod. So that's a beautiful aspect of the initiative itself. A real economic development in Egypt would never be fulfilled without that holistic approach. So the initiative, to that extent, just by starting, is great. Now, the way it is coordinated, in which nowadays you have more than 20 ministries, you have more than 23 NGOs, and you have a little bit of effort to make things decentralized, in which here is the problem, here is the village, let's see what everybody can do in coordination without returning back to Cairo. We're focusing on where we are right now. So part of it is a little bit of decentralization. So it has all those good, nice, holistic economic development approaches, a textbook approach. When you look at the size of that initiative, relative to what has been going on in different parts of the world, this is huge. It's definitely huge. It's touching millions and millions of people.
Yes. Dr. Rady, now you spoke about the different players involved in such an initiative. 20 ministries, 23 NGOs, members of the civil society, to really focus on the decentralization aspect of it. Now we're talking about over 4,000 villages, and to really focus on thousands of villages with all of the life and social life aspects that you've mentioned. Who decides what should the ministries take care of? What should the NGOs take care of? Who's responsible for this? Who's going to finance this? Is it the NGOs? Are they the NGOs or the ministries? Who becomes the sort of the puppeteer? Still, if we're going for decentralization, who calls the final shots?
The management team of the initiative itself is backed up by a whole lot of think tanks, a whole lot of experts in the subject matter. And the criteria was set so straight and so transparent. In fact, if you check their website, you'll find transparency as one of the guiding principles. In choosing which village to help, there should be a measurement of poverty, measurement of other standards of living. You decide for the very first stage the ones that are in deep need for reform right now. And then the second stage would look from a poverty point of view to those living into the poverty levels between 50 and 70% of the population. And then you go to less than 50% in the third stage of it. So there is a set criteria, very clear to those who are taking decisions. The coordination would have to go project by project basis. What is needed? So infrastructure, for example, the Ministry of Housing. You have the sewage. You have then communications. Ministry of Communications would do an amazing job into pouring fiber optics into the villages for the very first time. Not regular internet. They're going to end up with fiber optics. Electricity, Ministry of Electricity. So each in his own part is taking decisions.
Well, we've seen with the visit and the inspection of President Sisi's to the village, the Shahema village in Aswan, and he inspected and toured the healthcare units, the primary and preparatory schools, all of these things. Now, people might focus or only see it on the telly at Shahema village in Aswan, but there are hundreds of villages that have been really on the receiving end of the Decent Life initiative. Now, what would you say so far has been the biggest challenge in really implementing the Decent Life initiative and raising the standards of living? The first thing that comes to mind is the healthcare, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic over the past year or so. Has that been the biggest challenge? Has the infrastructure been the biggest challenge, the education, or maybe the cultural and social aspect of it is changing the mindset of citizens living in the rural areas and villages?
Now, like any other developed nation, probably the most and the most major challenge here is bureaucracy itself, in which the political will and the political backup for the initiative have managed to break the red tape really fast. What happened at the very first year, since I think October 2019 when the initiative started, and if you look at the speed at which things have been happening and the speed in which the coverage has been expanding, I guess that has been a very good facing of bureaucracy, that has been breaking red tape, that has been a breakthrough in how we manage major programs in Egypt. So that's the very first thing. COVID and all the other things that have hit us so hard within the last 1 or 2 years haven't been as big as bureaucracy, in my own opinion.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Decent Life initiative is not just, it's much more than a charitable sort of initiative. It is a developmental initiative to really raise the standard of the Egyptian citizen, and it is considered one probably of the biggest, or maybe the biggest initiative and project in Egypt's modern era and history. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
أعلن اليوم انطلاق مشروعنا الوطني الأعظم لتنمية الريف المصري حياة كريمة.
The Decent Life Presidential Initiative for Rural Development is expected to be an unprecedented achievement for Egypt. During an inspection of road developments within the Together We Build the Future initiative, President Sisi stressed that citizens must see the amount of work that will be done to develop the Egyptian countryside under the new project. The president further added that he dreamt that lives of people in the villages must be changed. He noted that there must be cooperation from the people in the villages so that they help in the final output, and that there would be a competition for the best center, governorate and village within the initiative, adding that the rewards would be big and meaningful. The Decent Life initiative is working to develop about 4,500 Egyptian villages by building 175 administrative centers in 20 governorates. The most impoverished villages were targeted for funding according to data and surveys by the Central Agency for Mobilization and Statistics in a coordination with government ministers and other authorities. So far, the initiative has succeeded in reducing poverty rates and providing critical services to targeted villages. It has witnessed the aggregation of the work efforts of all initiatives, such as the 100 Million Health Initiative, Solidarity and Dignity, Egypt Without Debt, amongst others. These initiatives, which the President implemented, will be combined and applied simultaneously in all the targeted villages, and the pace of their implementation will be accelerated in all villages. It is called the Project of the 21st Century for Egypt because the greatest challenge in the project is that it is not linked to one geographical area, but attends to all parts of Egypt, and it is not a single engineering work, but rather includes thousands of projects that will be implemented simultaneously in all parts of the country. It aims to achieve various goals, such as the comprehensive development of all interventions required for infrastructure and facilities, decent housing for the first groups with care, improving health and education services, developing units and youth centers, economic empowerment, training, rehabilitation and employment of those who are able to work, and invest in human development. In addition, it is also working on filling the development gaps between villages to eliminate poverty, stimulate the values of community participation between state institutions and citizens, and accommodate volunteer youth capabilities, directing their efforts to charitable and development work.
الحكاية في مصر فكر قالها نبني وقال نعمر قلب عون الله هنقدر عمره ما يقول استحالة قام وسمى الله أكبر خلى لون الأرض أخضر جنة سبحان اللي صور بص شوف بعينك تعالى.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Rady. Now, sir, a lot of people citizens who live in the big cities, they're not really aware of, they might not be aware of the sufferings of the people living and citizens living in the villages and the rural areas. And you've been telling me about the developments that already took place in a lot of the villages and how the people are looking forward. It gave them hope for more development, having electricity all day long, having running water all day long. The simple things that maybe a lot of people take for granted. Now, how far or how soon can we actually say, well, 4,500 villages, they're all now developed and they're all equipped with the educational institutions, the medical healthcare units, sanitation, energy, and SMEs and industries? And when can we say that? How soon can we say that?
Well, what you have said, has something really interesting, which I consider as one of the biggest gains of the initiative is the word hope. Because if you imagine how people were living in some of those villages, of course, very hard to imagine. No running water, or running water coming a few hours per day. Same thing for electricity, no natural gas, no sanitation, no hospitals or clinics in the near vicinity, no education. Schools, if there is a school, it would probably be extremely crowded with students. So what they have seen today is the villages touched by the initiative. Things have changed. And all the surrounding villages start feeling the glimpse of hope, that their turn is coming soon. Whether those who lie in that high poverty neighborhood, or those who are between the 50 and 70% of the population are below poverty, or those who are even below 50%. This is the third and last stage. The first stage focused on the ones in dire need. And that's when you're really targeting good. So those you are expecting to finish within the next year. And then calculate the second phase and the third phase. The whole three phases altogether are part of Egypt 2030 look, in which the goal is, at the end of the initiative, no village in Egypt would have no electricity, and no village in Egypt would have no sanitation, and no village in Egypt would have no internet or no natural gas. You'll give it up all the way to 2030, but I think the people implementing this are hoping to finish way before that.
Now, all of these developments, they need to comply with the vision of Egypt 2030.
Yes.
Now, we're talking about literally building a new country, a new republic. I mean, this project affects 58 million people. That's more than the population of many countries around the world. Now, is it easier, does it become easy to not just develop the villages in terms of like the 80s or the 70s and having nice roads and standardized hospitals or whatever, but now like wanting to achieve the sustainable development goal, having the highest sort of level of information communication technology and the highest form of and speed of internet, the best educational facilities. Now, does it make it more difficult to develop places and villages that are in dire need than ones that are developed, or is it the other way around?
Well, the idea here is you want a sustainable and a balanced development. Sustainable would include the three aspects of sustainability. There's social dimension, economic dimension, and of course there is the environmental direction. So by a balance from a sustainable point of view, you have to have the three aspects, which, by the way, is embedded in the initiative. So you have a whole lot of recycling projects, for example. The second part is, an even growth. An even balanced growth. You cannot grow in the north without having the south catch up with you. It's a win-win situation. When you're developing the poorest areas or the least poor or the ones a little bit higher and a little bit higher, you can expect a whole lot of people to work and a whole lot of production to take place, and then an integration in the whole economy and the whole nation, its output is going to increase. So what you're doing by reaching out to the least is that you're actually ending up increasing your economic efficiency. So it's one unified thing.
Yes, but if you're upgrading a hospital, which is easier or faster or cheaper to actually build and establish a hospital from scratch at the highest standards, or have an already existing ailing sort of hospital and trying to upgrade it?
Well, if you see, in taking and making decisions within the initiative, that's what they are exactly doing. In certain areas, they are rebuilding schools. In certain areas, they are rebuilding houses, or fixing houses, or repairing houses. But then comes an important point, for example, when it comes to hospitals. If you look at Cairo, the Cairo train station, the main Ramses train station, what do you find all the way around it? They're buildings filled with doctors. And the reason doctors and the clinics are located right next to the train station is people are coming from the south, and when they leave the train, they want to find the clinic right across the street.
Yes.
Now, that's because you don't have that many in the south. So sometimes it makes economic sense to establish medical centers, to attract doctors, and take the excess supply of doctors in regions like Cairo and Alexandria and remove them, reallocate them to the south. So there are some ideas over there that does really make economic sense when you're focusing on rebuilding. Industries, for example, well, you have to have some agricultural-based industries in the upper Egypt region. So there is an economic sense in rebuilding, and there is an economic sense, when it is right, to build from scratch.
Yes. Dr. Rady, now such an initiative costs billions.
Yes.
Now, about the financing of such an initiative, what are the mechanisms? How do you finance such an initiative that is an ongoing process for years to come, maybe until 2030? Keeping in mind, keeping the balance that you also want the whole nation to feel the economic growth, to feel, to bear the fruits of the economic reform, to have a growth in the GDP. How do you balance this equation?
Well, 20 years ago or so, a little bit more, the concept that was floating so much within the writings in economic development was the concept of participatory development. It is when the civil societies, NGOs, people like me and you, volunteers, join up forces with the central government into making a real change. This initiative has been a concrete application of that concept. When it comes to financing, it's joint. And here comes the good idea, or the efficient idea of using money. The government has been using money that it has saved by reducing subsidies throughout the last few years from the reform program. If you recall, the oil prices, gas prices in the streets have been set free. Liberation of the currency, and then reducing subsidies on electricity, natural gas, and on different. All those have increased the economic efficiency. And again, you cannot do this without trying to give your hand to those who are going to be the hardest hit out of that. So you took the excess funds that you have saved out of those economic reform programs and you've redirected it to help those who are in need. But again, you are not giving aid. You are building capabilities so that people end up able to build a future for their own. And by that, they are going to be active participants in increasing GDP and increasing the welfare of all Egyptian citizens, not just themselves. So you are balancing both. You are balancing what you can consider as aid with what you would consider as I'm building capabilities for better production in the future.
Well, sir, if we're looking at, if we want to speed up this process, we need to look at what could slow it down. So you've said that maybe one of the biggest challenges would be the bureaucracy and the red tape. Now, how can we overcome this ASAP? And at the same time, what are other challenges? Because there must be other challenges or other obstacles to overcome.
Well, if you're scared of bureaucracy, what it seems like right now is that the political will to implement that project all the way to the end is enormous, unprecedented, and it's here to stay, in my opinion. And it also has created so much public support that the public support itself would always ask for more. So from that part, I'm not really worried. I would be always more interested in gaining more active participants from the civil society. I would like to see an increase in the number of NGOs participating. I would like to see an increase from the 4 or 5 large companies that are donating. I would like to see 500, 5,000 participating. So the next phase would have to increase the domain of those who are actively contributing to this initiative.
Yes. Well, we spoke about the members of civil societies, NGOs, and the government, the ministries, the public sector. What about the private sector? What about foreign investors? How much involvement should they have or could they have in such an important initiative?
Well, I wouldn't count much on foreign investment at the moment into financing such an initiative. Foreign investors are looking for profits, and they are going to come usually for the longer term. That's what we would like to see. But indeed, this initiative carries out the goal of creating a much more stable economic system, much more stable political system, much more stable country at the end. Those elements alone are very much targeting foreign direct investment in the medium to the long term. We're still suffering from the COVID. We're still suffering from so many different other things in the region. And foreign investors would take their time before they decide to finally come. Local investment, on the other hand, is the one that should really be encouraged to participate. Allocating a whole lot of projects in that area would be incredibly important. And that's a big challenge.
Well, when we talk about allocating different projects or industries to these villages, we're already talking about allocating people moving and leaving the big cities and moving to the new cities. Now, is it far-fetched to also hope for not just going or relocating to the new administrative capital or El Alamein city or the Mansoura city, but also going to the villages, going to start up projects there where it might be a bit costly or a bit tiresome moving or allocating, but more or less it's a more guaranteed outcome and benefits, even in terms of profit?
Yes, but the very first gain is to stop people coming from the south to the north. Rural to urban migration has always been a problem. And one of the targets of this initiative is to slow down that phase of people coming in. You have been seeing what's happening in Cairo and Alexandria and so many different other governorates of widening streets, reconstructing everything. But the idea is when you do that, people start coming more and more from the south, and you end up within 20 years with the same exact thing. So targeting rural areas right now was of very important strategic value. You are slowing down the migration from rural to urban areas. That's one thing. Then comes the hopeful phase, in which you are reversing the direction of migration by creating job opportunities, industries, hospitals, and so forth, so that in the future you can have people going from north to the south. It's a far-fetched a little bit, but foreseeable.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the Decent Life Initiative, it is definitely one of the biggest projects and initiatives in Egypt's modern-day history. And as Dr. Rady mentioned, it's not about helping or raising just the standards of living of the Egyptian citizen. It is also about giving them hope for a better life and a better tomorrow. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Tamer Rady, head of the Economics Department and Faculty of Business at Ain Shams University. Dr. Rady, always a pleasure having you with us.
Same.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.